So I'm going to do these videos a little differently from what we were actually told to do. Most of the time that I went to field placement, it was either raining, snowing, they didn't have field placement, or every day I had my bio lab after it, so I didn't really have time to produce all of these individual videos as a whole. So I'm just going to do it as a full out video, especially because most of the time I was doing the same exact thing. So this semester for field placement for ECCO, I was placed into the rural school of Otsego Elementary School, which is about 10 to 15 minutes away from Bowling Green State University. And growing up in a rural, almost suburban neighborhood, pulling up to Otsego, like viewing the outside of it really hit home to me. It matched my school's outside so well, you know, the new field, the overall cornfield surrounding it. It just basically stated truly a rural school district. During my first day of field placement, when we arrived at Otsego, you know, walking in, I wasn't as nervous as the first time because I'd been through it before. But I learned soon enough that Otsego is a pre-K through 6th grade school, and it is actually newly formed from 2 separate elementary schools. The school actually just opened this year, and it's new and improved for these 2 groups of students to come together as a whole and be, as I say, united. During my first day of field placement, I learned that these 2 schools had a somewhat different perspective. My supervising teacher informed me that one of these schools was actually a little bit more well off than the other, but you could tell that they were both in need of renovation. When you first enter the school, you notice their overall theme of their mascot as a whole, which is the Knights. Their school has an overall medieval theme. They have various things, such as when you enter into the cafeteria, which is the main part of the school that you enter in through. The cafeteria tables have, you know, the Knights emblem on them, and on the wall there's a giant mural that has, you know, castles, knights, dragons, horses, princesses, you know, anything that you can think of it with a, you know, Knights theme. And the walls have up and down, you know, brick structures that look like the top of a castle, which I thought was neat. And when you go to each door of the teachers' rooms, their little plaque that tells their name and their room number is also a Knight's emblem. So with this school, spirit with their mascot is really important. This semester at Otsego Elementary School, my supervising teacher was Mrs. Curtis. Mrs. Curtis is actually a former graduate from Bowling Green State University. She originally graduated with an early childhood education degree. However, due to the new formation into this new school, she got offered a job with 4th grade. So she went back to Bowling Green and got her endorsement for, you know, 4th and 5th grade, like early childhood, majors are allowed to do. And she now teaches both math and language arts to the 4th grade, well, half of the 4th grade at Otsego. And her team teacher, Mrs. Bookman, teaches social studies and science, which is a little bit different of a feel for the schools. Usually, you know, it's language arts, social studies, and science, and math, but they're mixing it up a little bit. However, Mrs. Bookman actually had a student teacher this semester, so she didn't do much of the teaching, but I did experience a little bit of her teaching towards the end of the semester. One thing that I noticed that was greatly different about Otsego Elementary School compared to Douglas Road Elementary School is the overall organization of the school as a whole. And I understand that obviously Otsego is a newly improved school and Douglas Road wasn't, but I really don't think that this, you know, has anything to do with it, or doesn't have that much to do with it. But as I walked into Mrs. Curtis's room for the first day, I looked down at her desk and I noticed how neat and organized it was. And I actually said to her, like, your desk is way cleaner and your room looks way more clean and organized compared to the last school I was at. And she actually said to me, no, this is actually dirty, which was surprising to me. It wasn't dirty at all. But in addition to this, I noticed a difference in overall drive in the students at Otsego compared to Douglas Road. The students at Douglas, you know, would sit around, they wouldn't want to answer Mrs. Winterstein's questions, but during the lessons at Otsego, Mrs. Curtis makes it mostly interactive. She involves, you know, smart boards, different forms like rulers, compasses, protractors, anything to get the students motivated to learn. And these students are actually into answering questions, or into helping their peers, they're into actually schoolwork a lot more than the kids at Douglas, which surprised me a lot. However, one difference that I noticed that's a little bit downgraded from Otsego to Douglas is the fact that most of the kids at Otsego need a little bit extra help than the normal student. Most of these kids are a little bit far behind, although it may be due to the fact that these kids are on two different spectrums, coming from two different schools. But a lot of these kids have to either go to the host program, which is a program that works with them on reading to get them ready for OAAs or just ready for the next grade in general, or they would sit back in the back of the classroom with Tori and I, and we'd mentor them and help them with reading, math, just comprehension as a whole. But that's the main difference that I've noticed compared to Douglas and Otsego. However, I personally did enjoy Otsego more because of the overall, organization, the overall student-led help with other students actually being encouraging to learn, and just as a whole being great students. Like I said earlier, due to having biolab and just other experiences after and during field placement, I'm going to explain to you what exactly I did each day at field placement just in this little segment. Which, like I said also, it was mostly the same thing every time. But the first day I walked in and I was introduced to Mrs. Doran, who is the host program lady. And we were informed that we would either do the first half of the day or the second half of the day in the host program. And I got chose for the second half. So my second half of the day was always dedicated to 3 students and hosts, but I'll get back to that later. But the beginnings of my day, I would sign in at the host program, go to Mrs. Curtis' room, and sit in the back and look at the organized, list of things that she had for me to do. And most of the time it was working, to begin with 2 students on math comprehension. We do division, subtraction, multiplication, anything to get them, more boosted up with their math overall. And then I would work with around 3 different groups of about 4 to 5 kids with reading comprehension. We would work on worksheets using, cause and effect, characters, setting, anything to get these students up to par with these worksheets. And we'd have, reading comprehension worksheets to answer in complete sentences questions as well. And then Mrs. Curtis had a variety of different books that we used, and we'd read them, and throughout each chapter I would ask them to give me a summary of these books and just the chapter as a whole, and the students were actually really motivated through these practices. And then at the end of each book there was about 3 or 4 questions that the students could engage in, and we could talk about it as a little, a little small group. So this part in the classroom gave me, experience with working with a small group. And actually my last day of field placement, which was last week, I got a little bit of experience working with the OAAs and techniques and, tricks that I could use with the OAAs. And then after that, after about lunchtime, when the students come back from recess, I go to the host program, and I work with 2 kindergartners and 1 third grader. With the kindergartners, we work with, ABCs, 1, 2, 3s. We work with colors, anything to get them up to par with what they're supposed to be at this level in kindergarten. And with a third grader, we worked with OAAs, reading comprehension, spelling, vocab, anything these students need to get them up to language arts levels that they should be at right now. And that's basically my overall experiences at Otsego. So overall, I greatly enjoyed my experience at Otsego Elementary School, and I enjoyed the facts and tips and tricks that Mrs. Curtis and Mrs. Bookman informed both Tori and I about. The last day of field placement was actually really nice. I learned a lot of tricks, not only for learning about the OAAs, but we learned how to file for an IEP and the amount of forms and the amount of work that you have to file for just one IEP. And Mrs. Curtis actually informed me that you don't really learn how to do that in school. So it was neat to learn something that, we're not going to learn about a lot in school. And they taught us about, when you're in student teaching, you need to make your own methods, or you need to make your own plans for teaching. Don't use your teachers, and if you're going to ask them for advice, ask them early. You want to be well prepared in order to make yourself look professional. But altogether, I really enjoyed my experience at Otsego, and I'm really happy to the fact that both those teachers, Mrs. Curtis and Mrs. Bookman, did invite both Tori and I back to their classroom, and they're excited to have us again. So I'm looking forward to going back there next year for both my teaching with exceptionalities, or students with exceptionalities class, and educational psychology. So I will be united with the Knights again someday. Thank you.